What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Dishonored, the critically acclaimed immersive sim from Arcane Studios back in 2012 that I finally got around to playing for the very first time, pretty recently of course, here in 2023. Now, before we get into all of that, I review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform, and while that does include the achievements, it also includes more than that. If you're curious about everything I cover, there's a video linked in the description below. If you're not subscribed and go to my channel, it's also the first video that you'll see. My Steam profile is also public and linked below as well. And for the people that regularly ask me about including achievements in these reviews, most of them were pretty easy. The only really, I would say, difficult achievements for this game involved the Dunwall Trials DLC, which had some, I would say, almost random or potentially RNG-based achievements, in a few of them where you could just get unlucky. But we'll talk more about that in a bit. Now, for these older titles, I like to kick the video off talking a little bit about the technical state of them in modern day, and in the case of Dishonored 1, it's still in great shape, actually. There's a definitive edition that will come with all the DLCs and everything, of course. And at the very least, that version of the game, which is the one that I played, runs very smoothly. Not really much of an issue on modern hardware at all. The game crashed exactly one time on me, which was actually in the Trials DLC. But otherwise, this is a game that is still running very well, which I'm always happy to see. As a channel that covers a lot of older games, many of them have fallen into disrepair, so to speak, that has been left up to the community to fix, and it's nice to see an older game like this still running properly on modern hardware. But that said, Dishonored was of course developed by Arcane Studios, and what's more, Dishonored was sort of their, I would say, breakout hit. They have a couple of older games that are, I would say, relatively popular within the right circles, which are Arx Fatalis and Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, which both released in the 2000s. But Dishonored in 2012, I would say, is really the game that put them in the limelight, so to speak, and it was their first game after being bought up by Bethesda or ZeniMax in 2010. But Dishonored as an immersive sim is, I would say, rooted in previous works in that genre, the Thief series probably being the biggest one, especially the stealth there. But in spite of that, Dishonored still manages to come across as its own thing with unique settings, unique visuals, and overall the game feels like a very cohesive vision, which I'm sure is in no small part what contributed to its sort of wild success. And that's kind of what I really want to dig into here, because while this certainly probably isn't new information for a lot of people watching this, it is new to me. And like many YouTubers, I hardly need much of an incentive to talk about something like I'm the only person who knows about it. So first up, let's talk about the story setup for Dishonored. We play as Corvo Attano, the Lord Protector to Empress Jessamine Caldwin, who presides over the city of Dunwall. Dunwall has been hit by a plague recently. It is killing most everyone, ravaging through the place, and they are desperate to find a cure. The game kicks off with Corvo returning from a voyage to speak to other cities and hope that maybe they had dealt with this before and had some information they could share. Unfortunately, the answer to that is no. However, upon our arrival back to meet the Empress, she is murdered and her daughter, Emily, is kidnapped. As Lord Protector, we are there and are able to stop some of the assassins, but are ultimately brushed aside as the Empress is murdered. However, we are framed for this incident almost immediately afterwards. After which, the game flash forwards about 6 months, time with which we were imprisoned and tortured. The prison scene opens up with an admission from other big players in the city that they set you up and were the ones to have the Empress assassinated. However, we managed to break out of jail right after this with the help of a loyalist conspiracy, people who basically are aware that this wasn't you and would like your help in getting back at the people who did it, which sets the game up for a sort of classic story of revenge via assassination. However, it does get a bit more interesting than that. After we manage to escape the prison and sleep, we'll be contacted by the Outsider, a supernatural entity who grants us supernatural powers. The key power being Blink, the ability to teleport across distances, and this, combined with some technology provided to us by the Loyalists, is the tools we're going to be using to take down the people who wronged us. However, the game does get a bit more interesting still with the addition of chaos. Now, for the most part, I enjoyed the story. It has up to 3 endings for the main game, which are mostly dependent on the game's chaos meter, which is, for the most part, merely a representation of how many people you've murdered along the way. And while I'd be lying if I said I love the chaos system, I do think it has some nuance to it that is worth talking about. Simply put, if you go on a rampage and kill everyone possible, the chaos level will be high, which will lead to a slightly different variation in a few of the end missions, alongside with the plague only getting worse. Now, unfortunately, you don't really see the full effects of the high chaos runs until the very end of the game. I would say it only affects the last few missions substantially, with only minor variations being in the earlier missions. That said, it's pretty easy to put the game in a high chaos state sort of accidentally, as the game sets itself up to be a game about stealth and assassination, but if our character kills more than a handful of people, we're immediately thrown into the high chaos part, which means if you want the good ending, it's more of a stealth game than an action game. On the flip side of that, a low chaos game, while I think it is certainly a bit more challenging, especially navigating the non-lethal ways to take out some of your priority targets, nonetheless feels a little more, I would say, canonical, because at the end of the day, we're the Lord Protector of the Empress and we're trying to set things right and clear our own name, and probably the worst thing you could do when trying to clear your own name is massacre civilians. So narratively, I think it makes sense that our main character wouldn't want to do that, and we can also get some extra plot as well simply by going the low chaos route, because this is sort of the way that we'll find out that Emily, the Empress's daughter, is actually Corvo's daughter. It's hinted at in places throughout the game, but it's pretty much directly stated in the low chaos run, as we can find pictures in this version that will show you and Emily with Dad labeled over it, and then in a cutscene it's mentioned that you were more than just the bodyguard to the Empress, that kind of thing. And with Emily being your daughter, it might come as no surprise that your actions have a pretty big impact on her, and that's probably the biggest thing the chaos level affects, which plays pretty heavily into the ending. And while I think that's a cool enough system, at the same time I think it can be a little bit frustrating that it does sort of feel like you're being actively punished for playing the game and engaging in combat, because it is very restrictive with that bad ending. So while I enjoyed the story and I can see what they're going for, I don't think the chaos system is sort of perfectly implemented here, and while it doesn't bother me to a point where it detracts from the rest of the experience, I do have some mixed feelings on it. Broadly speaking, I really enjoyed the story. It certainly doesn't waste a minute of runtime. It's probably going to take you like 12 to 15 hours for a single playthrough, and even then you're likely not going to see everything without playing through it a couple more times. Overall though, I'd describe it as very well paced. Next up, we have the progression systems. Progression in Dishonored is very simple, as it's a relatively linear game. Once we meet the Outsider, he'll explain to us that if we find runes, we'll be able to use these to activate more of his power within ourselves, which basically means that our main form of progression, I would say, is the rune system. Throughout levels, you can find a variety of runes, and you can use these to upgrade and unlock new supernatural powers, which will change up the way you play. Many of them are very strong. Blink is mandatory. You'll get a version of that no matter what, but the rest is up to you. You can use all of them or none of them, and these supernatural powers, I would say, are the core piece of what makes you very overpowered in comparison to the enemies. Outside of being just simply outnumbered, you're unlikely to die much. But then we have our bone charms. These are little charms you can find throughout levels that can be equipped for passive bonuses. There's quite a few of these. They will change little things, give you a bit more health, let you eat a rat for mana, that kind of thing. And these simply help you lean into the thing you want to do more. But last up, we have our upgrades. When we are in the hub area of the game, which we'll talk about in a bit, it's possible to talk to Piero, who will potentially upgrade our equipment. As we move through various levels and collect things, we'll be earning money at the same time, which can be spent with Piero to either buy supplies or upgrade our equipment. This can do things like give us new weapons or throwables to use, things like sticky grenades, that kind of stuff, on top of simply upgrading what we have, such as increased accuracy, range, reload time on things like our crossbow or our gun, the ability to zoom in with our mask even. And what's more, throughout various levels we can find blueprints for unique upgrades that can then be brought back to Piero to unlock even further customization, so to speak. For the most part, if you're being thorough, you'll more than likely be able to purchase just about everything available to you. And that is pretty much it, I would say, progression-wise. But I do think it's also worth mentioning here that the progression systems, I think, really highlight what Dishonored excels at, which is providing a wide swath of what I would consider pretty basic systems that all sort of interlap and interweave together to make something that is complex. Which brings us to the world and gameplay section. Now, as a game, Dishonored is fairly linear. You're going to be working through various stages, which are semi-open levels that see us working our way towards a target. In between those missions, we'll come back to the hub that the Loyalist conspiracy is working out of, where we'll be able to rest, interact with some other characters before taking on our next mission. Now, when it comes to the central hub, what I really liked about that is that it gives a chance for a lot of the more non-action oriented things to shine. You can talk to many of the characters that are in the area and they'll have unique things to say. One of the things the outsider gives you is a heart that has some sort of clockwork elements that you can use to locate the runes in various levels. But the other thing the heart can do for you is actually tell you the thoughts of people around you. And this is fantastic even as you're going through the levels to get some more, I would say, perspective on what's going on around you, as you can listen to people's thoughts, get their opinions on things, and it's a great way to find information and at the same time immerse yourself in what is going on. And because of this, there's a lot of secret things and hints and little interactions you might miss otherwise that adds a lot of replayability to an otherwise short game. Because while the game is short, they do try to emphasize things changing as you go through the game. Now, I don't think that part of it was handled super well. To give an example, on your first big mission, you can perform a series of side quests for an NPC called Granny Rags. This will see you potentially interacting with a local street gang. And then on the next level, we're sent back to the same area just during the daytime and can then interact with the leader of that gang. And it can kind of show us what our actions could have potentially done here. And I can see what they were going for with that, but at the same time, a back-to-back level repeat of the place we just were isn't really that fun, because while I suspect the reasoning for this was to show you sort of the consequences of the things you did, it is nonetheless literally just you running back through places you've already been doing almost identical things, just for a different person. And I think that part was probably the weakest point of the game, especially in terms of its level design, because otherwise, Dishonored has really fantastic level design that really encourages a lot of approaches. Basically, anything you're told to do, there's a variety of ways to do it. The direct option, of course, just running through and killing everything, or using stealth, or even potentially finding secret pathways. For instance, it is possible to use one of your supernatural powers to possess things like animals or later humans, but you could potentially possess a fish and find a way through the sewers to your target. There's a lot of stuff like that hidden around, and the more you explore, the more you'll find it. Given all your powers, there's a decent amount of verticality to it as well, and a lot of the fun for this game, at least for me, was simply finding my way through these levels in unique ways, because while I was playing the game in my stealth no-kill run, I was really interested in exploring and trying to find the best way through without alerting enemies, and the layouts, I would say, really encouraged that design. Every time I'd run through an area, it felt like I was discovering something new, just because I made the small decision to go a slightly different way this time, and that felt pretty great. Which is helped along by the fact that we have a variety of means to move at our disposal. We can, of course, run, sprint, jump, all the usual stuff, but it's also possible to do things like teleport via blink. A lot of the fun comes in learning how to do those things in an especially useful way. That is to say, learning how to blink past certain obstacles, or simply combine all of those elements to keep yourself highly mobile while at the same time just murdering everything around you. And while I lack the skill to do it especially well, you can find some videos on YouTube of people just going crazy with this system in that way, which is especially interesting for what is largely considered a stealth action game. And the fact that this system is so robust just as to accommodate all of those playstyles within it is really cool to me, and I think that's probably the most successful thing that Dishonored does. But that does finally bring us to our combat section. Now, combat is interesting. I haven't talked much about difficulty up to this point, but I do think it's worth mentioning that there are several difficulty levels for the game, which primarily affect the damage you take, but also the perceptions of your enemies. Now, on normal mode, enemies don't really pose a threat to you hardly at all. They can, of course, discover you, but even if they do, you're going to be so much more powerful than all of them that you're never really in what I would consider danger. Now, if you're trying to go purely stealth, it might be annoying because you'll have to reload, but that's about it. Because of all of our abilities via the pistol, the crossbow, ways to take enemies out without actually killing them, etc., we just have so many options that the guards can't really keep up. But on the higher difficulties, that becomes a bit of a different story. Enemies are more easily able to detect you, and they also deal extreme amounts of damage that will usually kill you in just a couple of hits. And while you are still very overpowered, the guards simply have a better chance of finding and killing you in those higher difficulties. So certainly something to keep in mind. Because on normal, unless you just get simply overwhelmed and outnumbered, it's unlikely you're ever going to really die unless you just get unlucky. But beyond that, combat has a lot of options. Now, there is the sort of stealth non-combat stuff that I'll mention here as well that I'm sure you've seen on screen. We can sneak around and knock people out, and we do have a weapon that has the option of not killing a target, such as our sleep darts from our crossbow, which is essentially a tranquilizer. We can just put people to sleep rather than killing them outright if we're going for that non-lethal run. But we have a lot more options to kill people than we do to leave them alone, I would say. But first, let's talk a little bit about detection, because it's probably the area of the game that I think is the most inconsistent, because sometimes it feels like enemies will spot you from practically across the map, or they'll discover a body and then immediately know where you are somehow, even if you're not around. So detection can be a little bit annoying, but it's a sort of leveled system that involves stages. If an enemy discovers something or you pickpocket them, they might go into the first little thunderbolt above their head, which is simply that, hey, something's up. If they think they saw you, they'll then deviate from their normal path and look at your direction, usually while still walking their route. They'll just be looking towards you, which might increase further detection. Now, at 2 little thunderbolts, this is usually when they'll turn to face the direction of whatever it is, while also stopping whatever path they were walking. Now, at 3 thunderbolts, this is where they'll typically actually search for you, but technically you're not actually detected yet. You're not detected until all 3 of those are full, and then they sort of shatter red, at which point enemies are very aware of your presence, obviously. And which stage of detection they go into and how quickly largely depends on the situation, where you are in relation to them, how much of you they saw, and for how long, how close you are. There's a few factors there, but generally if you stay out of sight, it'll be fine. However, there are moments where this just feels very inconsistent, where it feels like enemies are seeing you through walls, etc., and that's probably my biggest gripe about the game and the gameplay. And while you can learn to work around it, enemy perceptions don't always seem consistent to me. Some of that I do think is by design. For instance, something I noticed is that some of them seem to change the route they were walking based on my position, like where I was on the level might change a certain guard's path, which I actually thought was kind of cool, but can be a little jarring if you're reloading from a failed stealth attempt to try to go a different way only for that guard to suddenly be on a new path that also puts them in your way again. And once I kind of realized what was happening there, I was able to better work around it. And another thing I noticed is that guards will sometimes switch paths, so to speak. For instance, if you take out a guard in a certain area and another guard walks by that area, they might notice that, hey, there's supposed to be somebody walking this route, and then that new guard will switch to the old guard's path. So little things like that are distinctive, I would say, but can be a little jarring if you aren't expecting them to happen. But I thought it was a pretty cool little thing once I realized it. Even that, and when it happens, again, just feels inconsistent. And sometimes that's really great, and sometimes it's just annoying. But then we have the actual combat side of things. We've got a variety of options here. We've got our blade, of course. We've got a pistol. We've got a crossbow. We've got grenades, throwables, traps. We've got our actual powers. We just have tons of options here. Pistols, close range, or one shot. Same thing with crossbows if you can get a headshot. Later on, we can find grenades, which can then be upgraded to sticky grenades. We can find explosive bullets for our pistol. And that's before we even start talking about environmental things. You can find explodable whale oil that can be thrown at enemies and blown up. And even then, further still, we have all sorts of our powers. We have a bend time power, which will slow things down and allow you to just murder people in succession. We can potentially summon a swarm of rats, which can also actually just devour corpses and get rid of the body for you. So more than anything, when it comes to combat, you simply have a lot of options, and sort of getting good at this system can be really rewarding. And I think it's probably the place where the chaos system can be a bit at odds with playstyles, because while the low chaos playthrough will give you the best ending, it's also just really fun to go murder hobo in this game and kill anyone that won't give you a game over. And as a result, they've accommodated, I would say, a lot of playstyles here. And I think my favorite example of this is the sort of house party mission where you have to infiltrate a high-class party to take out a specific target, but you don't actually know which of 3 people this could potentially be. They're all in different colored versions of the same costume, and the only real goal you have here is to kill the right one. And there's a variety of ways to do that. You can run into the party guns blazing and kill everyone. You can stealthily just kill all 3 of those people. You can find a bunch of clues and figure out which is the right one and then stealthily take that one out. There's also a non-lethal option where you can potentially knock out the correct one and then bring them to the basement where some weirdo will make off with them. But before even that, you have to infiltrate the party itself. Do you just murder your way through the gate, or do you actually sneak in? Do you get an invitation? Do you sneak in through the basement? There's just so many options, and Dishonored is really fantastic at letting you play with the systems they built here, and that is the most fun part. But that does bring us to the DLC section. There are 3 DLCs for Dishonored. 2 of them are more one story divided into 2, and then we have the Trials DLC. The Knife of Dunwall, followed by the Brigmore Witches, tells a story about the assassin of the Empress and how that moment changed his life. As he had been an assassin who had been contacted by the Outsider himself, and had special powers, which is how he was able to get around you to assassinate the Empress. But both Knife of Dunwall and Brigmore Witches tell the story of what he got up to while Corvo was murdering his way through the main game potentially, or just, stealthing his way through it. But much like the main game, we have options here. We can play our assassin as a repentant person who has actually changed his ways since that murder, going through non-lethally, taking out targets a different way, and in that regard, I would say Knife of Dunwall is the weaker portion of this. It's not bad, but it mostly just felt like more of the same with less powers, as you don't have a full slate of powers that are available to Corvo. And while they introduced some new weapons and things like that, it was just okay. It was mostly just more of the same with some slight variations. Now, the Brigmore Witches, on the other hand, I thought was pretty cool. They gave us some unique powers for our assassin, but again, we have a don't kill anyone option, a kill everyone option. You can actually import your save from Knife of Dunwall into this as well, and both of these actually introduce a new difficulty level called Master Assassin 2 for those DLCs. But overall, for Knife of Dunwall and Brigmore Witches, I would say the story between both of them is really compelling. However, gameplay-wise, it's mostly just more of the same. Brigmore Witches had 2 of, I would say, my favorite levels, though. Each DLC has 3 missions, and the first and third level of Brigmore Witches are fantastic levels that I really enjoyed playing through, but otherwise, I was mostly just in it for the story at that point. But then we have the Dunwall Trials. These are a series of trials that can be completed to earn rewards such as glimpses of concept art, fighting for a spot on the leaderboards for each individual trial. 6 of these trials have an optional hard mode called Expert, which will increase various difficulties within the challenge, such as just increasing the difficulty or perception of enemies or adding enemies, that kind of thing. And these trials range from, I would say, fun and interesting to awful and annoying. Some of them have achievements that are incredibly difficult, mostly because they're more RNG based than anything, but some of them can be very fun. There is one that sees you playing around with bend time to execute a situation perfectly to kill certain people. There's another one that sees you searching out 4 clues in a set environment to figure out which person in said environment you need to kill. I really enjoyed that one. It's called Mystery Foe. Burglar was pretty fun, which sees you sneaking into a house to steal 6 eggs and then anything else that isn't nailed down without being detected. Specifically, if you kill anyone, you take a hit to your multiplier. And while the trials by themselves for just a casual playthrough I think are pretty fun, the achievements for this are especially brutal at times. but one in particular was especially bad, called By My Own Hand I think it was, where you have to take part in the combat arena trial, but you have to be the one to personally take out every enemy, which might sound easy enough, but each combat wave can be a little different. It will spawn in from a set of enemies, and some of those enemies are from different factions, that is to say guards versus street gangs, and sometimes they'll kill each other, and where they spawn in is random. So this achievement isn't so much difficult as it is just playing through it until you get lucky enough to not have enemies spawn right next to each other and immediately kill one another. For a casual playthrough, I think the trials can be a lot of fun, but don't know that I'd recommend actually trying to get the achievements for most people. Unless you're trying to make a video like this, I suppose. In fact, I probably would have had this review up a day earlier if I hadn't had to spend a significant portion of time trying to nail that one achievement. But next up, we have the Steam Deck section of the video. Officially, this game is verified on Steam Deck, and I don't have much to add to that, as the game plays very, very well. We've got cloud saves, full controller support, the game runs well right out of the box, you don't have to do anything special. So basically, if you're comfortable with a controller, a Steam Deck is a fantastic way to play this game that's pretty much in line with the regular experience. But that brings us to our positives, negatives, and then we will wrap this thing up. Now, on the positive side of things, we have the overall vision for the game. Everything about Dishonored feels like it comes together and makes a very cohesive game where everything's sort of interlaced and interweaved in a way that pushes forward the goal of the game. Other positives were level design for me. I just enjoyed all the ways you could go through different levels, all the ways I could find different and new things, and that was a real blast for me. And all of the options presented by that and the way they can accommodate so many play styles is really something special, which I would say is why Dishonored enjoys such critical acclaim. But on the negative side of things, for me, the biggest negative was the AI the game uses. It can just be inconsistent at times, and while there are parts of it that I think are unique and interesting that I outlined earlier, oftentimes it just felt off a little bit. Sometimes enemies, again, just spot you from seemingly across the map for no reason. Other times they'll find a body and suddenly everyone knows where you are. And that combined with, as I mentioned earlier as well, the chaos system being a bit awkward, I would say. Sometimes it feels like you're punished just for engaging with some of the systems by getting what is essentially a bad ending. And while I can see what they were going for there, I do think it sort of eats into the fun of the game a bit, frankly. Now, as for a conclusion, rather unsurprisingly, I find Dishonored to be a fantastic game. It's my understanding the second one actually cleans up some of these issues that I mentioned, so I'll see about that when I get to that one. But Dishonored 1 is overall an incredible game. I can see why people enjoy it so much, so it might come as no surprise that I obviously did as well. And I think the tiny problems it does have are easily overlooked for how well it does everything else. So I can honestly say that I'm glad I finally got around to playing it, and I wish I had played it sooner, to be honest. It was a fantastic experience, and I'm looking forward to eventually playing the next one. Now, as it stands, with Dishonored being an older title, you can buy the definitive edition with all the DLC for $20 full price on Steam and whatever that is regionally for you. And for full price, yeah, you're getting a great game there, but because it's so old, you can also find it on sale pretty regularly. I personally got Dishonored 1, 2, and the standalone expansion for 2, Death of the Outsider, for like $15 for instance, which is pretty great value for money. So that's pretty much all I've got for you guys on Dishonored 1. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed playing it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about it or its sequels, etc. down in the comment section below. But regardless of all of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.